And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 115, season 3, episode 6. It is Thanksgiving weekend for those of you who are celebrating wherever you may be around the world. Here in Israel, those who do celebrate, many do celebrate on Friday night as opposed to Thursday night. And so the turkey is cooked, the chestnuts have been roasted, the pecan pie, the apple pie, all the stuffing, all that stuff is ready to go for dinner tonight. And as we step into this weekend, the portion of the week is the portion of Toldot. And our topic this week is playing the victim. This portion is unbelievable, right? We've said it the last couple of years. Last year we talked about Rebecca and her role and commitment to getting what she wanted to get done. The prior year we talked about Isaac and his digging of wells and his grit. And this year I want to focus in on a shift in perspective and talk about the victim. The story of a young man who is the apple of his parents' eye, who only seems to act with the intent of pleasing his parent. He's a twin. His brother is wholly different from him. With that description, it's not clear which sibling I am speaking of. Am I speaking of Jacob? Am I speaking of Esav? Or Esau, as it is pronounced in English. In this week's portion, the sibling who is the victim of what looks to some degree like a bit of a conspiracy is Esav, the older brother, the one born first. He's a victim. He is on some level victimized by his mother and his brother in a conspiracy to steal what appear to be his rightful blessings. When we read the story through, and the moment when it comes to bear that Jacob has stolen the blessings, that Jacob has tricked Isaac, the father, that there's no blessing left for Esav, and then he cries, it would be understandable to have an emotional connection to his cry in that moment. Sages tell us that that cry of Esav reverberates throughout the generations. The pain that he suffers at the hand of his brother Jacob, and effectively at the hand of his mother Rebecca, plays itself out over and over and over again over the course of the many generations as it transfers from Jacob and Esav to their descendants into the nations that they will to become, the nation of Edom on Esav's side and the nation of Israel on Jacob's side. And if you want to read into it a little bit further, just go no further than the first moments when they are introduced to us in the Bible. They're sitting there and Jacob is making soup. Esav is coming back from the fields. The text is unclear as to any wrongdoing that Esav has done in the course of his life till that point. The commentaries and the sages get quite descriptive in terms of the things that he has done wrong, but the text itself is ambiguous. And already at that moment, Jacob is plotting or coming up with a way to steal being the oldest child, the birthright of being the eldest, the firstborn. It's sort of an odd thing. And I hadn't really thought of it until this year, and thought about it a lot. And I was really sort of wondering about, where does that come from for Jacob? Why is he thinking of it? Why is that important to him? And we know there's something to these blessings. Something to the blessing that Abraham had, that Isaac has, that apparently he wants or that he needs to have. As to why they go through this entire trick and deceit and deception of Isaac to get the blessings is not today's focus. But already in the early stages of their adolescence, you want to call it, let's assume that at the time that they're in that moment there where Jacob buys or Esav sells the firstborn right, they're, let's say, teenagers there, approximately, pretty young. Already there's a conspiracy against Esav. And I was thinking about it jokingly. He's the Johnny Lawrence to the Danny LaRusso of this story. For those of you who get the reference, it works. If those of you who don't get the reference, that's okay too. But Esav is a victim. He is victimized by his brother, and he's victimized on some degree by his mother. And the question then becomes is sort of like, what is his response? Because we know, we said it early on in Coaching with the Bible, and it comes up all the time in all kinds of contexts and conversations, that once the circumstance has shown itself, there's that opportunity for response. The famous quote attributed to Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Esav has a choice to make once it is the case that it is clear that he has been deceived or that he has been duped or that he's been tricked and that his blessings have been stolen from him. His first reaction there is to beg his father for another blessing. Is there not another blessing for me? The second reaction is weeping. His third reaction is the promise he makes to himself that he will kill his brother. The fourth reaction he has is that he goes and he marries the daughter of Ishmael, his uncle. That one we'll talk about in just a second. So he's a victim. The question is that in the case of a victim, in the space of a victim, so how does a victim respond? What does a victim do? So there is something called victim mentality disorder. There was actually an online test to see whether or not one suffers from victim mentality disorder. I didn't take that one. I know in the past I've talked about having taken these other quizzes, online quizzes. This one I shied away from. I don't question whether or not I suffer from this mentality. I really don't. I think at moments we all feel the victim, that we've been victimized in certain situations and circumstances and moments in our life. But I didn't feel the need to sort of go through that test here. But victim mentality as an approach is a very basic concept that has massive, massive impact on lives. Victim mentality is the idea that life is happening to me. It is the following three beliefs. This is from an article from a website called verywellmind.com. I read a lot of articles there to really get perspective on a lot of ideas. And certainly the case of a victimization is perspective shifting. It's important. So victim mentality has three beliefs. Bad things have happened in the past and will continue to happen. Others are to blame for your misfortune. There is no point in trying to make a change because it will not work. So bad things have happened and will continue to happen. Others are to blame. And there's no point in trying to make a change because it won't work. And so when a person effectively lives inside the victimhood, that space, and they're there. That's where they stew. That's where they live. It's based in trauma. It's based in pain. It's understandable on some level. A person who's in that space then ultimately feels very, very weak, very exposed. That level of vulnerability is quite high. And in that space, their decision is to mostly remain the victim there's no confidence, there's no sense that getting out of that. If it's reinforced by other people's behavior around them, it's extremely demoralizing and debilitating. And what do you do in there? Now, it's not a permanent thing, but it is something that people sort of live in for extended periods of time. I think we've had that moment for a little bit of time, or we know people who live inside victim mentality. It's a very sort of reactive life. Things happen to them. Everything that's happening to them is bad for them. All that is in there, victim mentality. Now, that is not the case that Esav lives in victim mentality. I'm simply using him as the root of the idea of a victim. We could have used this later on in the Bible, talk about Joseph in the moments where he is thrown into the pit and then pulled out of the pit, and then the question of how he responds to that in his life. Understandably, the idea that he could be a victim there. Conspiracy against him as well, which is not different on some level than his uncle. And so the victim mentality, the behavior of the victim mentality, is that they're always blaming everyone else. They overreact to the smallest of things. They're living for sympathy and pity. That's what they want from you. And they have no sense of positivity about the future. It's, I imagine, frustrating and bewildering to be around people like that. And even when maybe opportunities present themselves to that kind of a person, they're not able to, or not willing to, probably more accurately, jump into the space where they can actually do anything about it. There's a great quote from Dr. Steve Maraboli, who talks about this subject a lot. The victim mindset dilutes the human potential. By not accepting personal responsibility for our circumstances, we greatly reduce our power to change them. Leads us into, after understanding what it is and how it shows up in someone's life, we turn towards how does one come out of it. I want to distinguish between two different terms that are very similar in nature. This came from actually the most recent book, I believe, that's the last work of the writings of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. On last week's portion, he quotes from Dr. Edith Eger, who wrote the book The Choice, about her experience and her survival in the death camps in Auschwitz. I have the book. It's an extraordinary book. I haven't finished it, but I've read good portions of it. And in there, she talks about the difference between victimization and victimhood. Victimization is what happens to you. Victimhood is how you respond to what happens to you. And this is the distinction that she shares. We are likely to be victimized in some way in the course of our lives. At some point, we will suffer some kind of affliction or calamity or abuse caused by circumstances or people or institutions over which we have little or no control. This is life, and this is victimization. It comes from the outside. In contrast, victimhood comes from the inside. No one can make you a victim but you. We become victims not because of what happens to us, but when we choose to hold on to our victimization. We develop a victim's mind, a way of thinking and being that is rigid, blaming, pessimistic, stuck in the past, unforgiving, punitive, and without healthy limits or boundaries. Again, that is not Esav. That's not why I'm bringing it up. But he is our first quote-unquote victim, let's say, in this sense, to what could be determined as some sort of a conspiracy or crime. And so when a person is sort of living in that, what do you do with them? How do you help them? How do they help themselves get out of that? And so according to a lot of the things, I think first understanding the difference between victimization and victimhood is important to appreciate that we all have been victims, but we don't all have to live in that for the rest of our lives. And that's tremendously important here. But as we're sort of working through this, like, how do we work out of it? Like, what do we do about it for ourselves if that's where we find ourselves living? And so in a great article that I saw on a blog called Positivity Blog, he talks about the idea that actually understanding the benefits, quote unquote, of victim mentality actually help a person out of victim mentality. And to appreciate that a person in getting the benefit, what's the benefit of living as a victim? There's no having to take risks. There's attention that it comes with. There's validation often that comes. There's no responsibility. Makes you feel like you're in the right all the time. And just being aware of that, he writes, is often enough to minimally start a person towards the path of coming out of being a victim. Once a person appreciates the quote-unquote benefit of being a victim, they can also appreciate what they're missing out on by being a victim all the time, by staying in that space of being a victim. And then first begin to appreciate or being okay with not being a victim. It's hard to always be the victim, I think. It's an easy way out, but it's a hard life to live, to sort of always live in that space of negativity and no options and no future, no prospects, all the stuff that we just mentioned before. So how do we do this? So first, with ourselves, if it's ourselves and we're sort of in that place, the first is a sense that I have to do something about this, right? I have to want to be out of this. I have to first sort of appreciate what in the world is holding me back. It was a group coaching call that I was on recently where the coach was talking about the concept of limiting beliefs. What are the things that are holding you back? And so set out the goal, right? This was sort of the approach. Set out the goal. What's the goal that wants to be accomplished? Even extend the goal. Make the goal even bigger. Double it, triple it, quadruple it, whatever that may be for you. And then ask the question is, what are the limiting beliefs that hold you back from getting there? One or two will come right away. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. It's not Stuart Smalley. People don't like me. Why would anyone believe me? Why would anyone select me? Why would anyone pay for that service? All these limiting beliefs. A lot of it is also rooted in our pasts, in our histories, in our experiences. They're not rooted in the now. They're not rooted in the moment. They're not rooted in the here and today. But yet we allow them to limit us and hold us back. So first identifying them and then challenging those things. Is that true today? Is it actually true today? I think that coach would appreciate if I say that out loud. And then the next part is really then stepping into life ownership. Owning one's own life is really, the most powerful thing. Responsibility and accountability for the things that are and are not happening. No longer allowing ourselves to foist that onto others. No longer allowing ourselves to wear the t-shirt that says victim on it all the time. The third thing that comes up here is, again, an identification and appreciation. We say this a lot, but it's important here too, is a sense of gratitude about, to some degree, if you want to look down and say there's people whose lives are a lot worse than mine, who are going through a lot worse trauma issues, have been subjected to much greater pain and suffering than I. And maybe I can then, sort of blink at a little bit more positivity. In the specific way, perhaps as a practice, is what am I grateful for right now? Is there anything, one thing that I'm grateful for right now? The smallest thing, the biggest thing, whatever it may be. The weather outside, the walk I just took, the cup of coffee I had, the conversation I just had with a friend, a family member, a spouse, a child, whatever it may be. All those things. And then the sense that I'm going to start to try to shift and think more positively about these moments. Perspective shift into a state of more positivity. Esav doesn't seem to dwell in that moment. He doesn't ultimately, spoiler alert, kill his brother. He actually stays around for a little bit of time. He is the paradigm in the sages of honoring and respecting one's parent, in this case, the father. he doesn't dwell in the victimhood, it doesn't appear. Jacob might think he is, and Jacob might think he's coming to kill him later on. But Esav moves on. Esav grows as a, quote unquote, as a person, but certainly as a nation, as a power. He even tries to fix it by marrying the daughter of Ishmael because he feels maybe that's a better choice. He's following in the advice, quote unquote, that was given to Jacob to not marry from the locals. And so he's moved and he's shifted into another place. I think there's a lot of things that we can do better, to get ourselves out of the space of victimhood and to move into a place of victory. The difference between victory and victim is very little. And so to seek out the opportunities of gratitude, to seek out opportunities for inspiration, to get out of that comfort zone. And then last, I think for me this week is to celebrate those small wins. Celebrate the small wins that give you momentum, that give you a little bit of wind at the sail. If it was that one positive thought, if it was that one positive thing that you did for yourself, it was a little bit of gratitude that you shared with yourself. You're on your own timeline, as a lot of the different literature writes. You're on your own timeline. Don't let someone else's progress from victimhood to victor affect your progress. This is your life and your situation. And these are all things that are completely and absolutely possible, and they're within our own grasp. They're within our own space. To appreciate them and to view them from a space of opportunity rather from opposition. Here's another great quote to end the week with from Steve Maraboli, which is the following. Every job I was denied for opened the door to new opportunities. Every relationship that hurt me led me to my true love. Every mistake I thought would be the end of me pointed me towards an incredible success. Sometimes when you think you're losing, you're winning. And so what it is that sometimes when we're living and operating in a space of victim, we're missing out on the reality that our life is good, that opportunities are present, and that victory is close by. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week. Those of you who celebrated Thanksgiving yesterday, happy Thanksgiving to you. Those of you celebrating today, enjoy. Everyone else also, have a great, great weekend. Happy Black Friday, happy Cyber Monday, and of course, for me, awesome Giving Tuesday next week.